The air in the grand hall hung thick not just with the smoke of pitch pine torches guttering in iron sconces, but with anticipation. It was the kind of stillness only a crowd holds before something irreversible begins. Stone arched high above, ribbed with dark oak and hung with faded banners of gold lions and red crosses. Sunlight, weak and wintry, slanted through the east-facing stained-glass window, a mosaic of saints and kings, casting fractured light across the rush-strewn floor. And there, at the center of it all, stood her. She was young, barely 20, and dressed in light orange, the color of dried marigolds or late summer wheat. Not the bold saffron of royalty, nor the dull ochre of peasants, but something in between, hopeful, almost naive. Her kirtle clung softly to her frame, laced tightly at the sides with brown leather thong, the ivory linen of her long sleeves catching the torchlight like parchment. A simple copper circlet rested in her chestnut hair, braided loosely over one shoulder. No jewels. No embroidery. Just that dress, a deliberate choice, a silent argument she hoped no one would need to hear. She had arrived 3 days prior, bearing sealed letters on yellowed vellum, stamped with a signet none alive remembered clearly, a wyvern coiled around a thorned rose. House Wyndham. Extinct for 40 years, its lands absorbed, its name murmured only in ballads and legal footnotes. She claimed descent, not directly, of course, but through a cadet branch, a forgotten daughter married into obscurity. Her story was polished, the fire at the manor, the lost records, the years of quiet hardship while petitioning local sheriffs, who turned her away with pitying shrugs. She spoke with the cadence of the educated, measured vowels, soft consonants, a trace of the West Country in her RS, just enough to sound authentic, not affected. She even described the rose garden at Wyndham Keep, how the petals bled crimson into the grey stone steps after rain. The court had listened. The Chancellor, a man whose face resembled a folded map of grievances, had narrowed his eyes, but said nothing. The ladies whispered behind ivory fans. Even the king, seated high on his throne of oak and iron, its arms carved with rampant lions, its back draped in crimson velvet, had leaned forward once, just slightly, when she spoke of her father's unjust dispossession. Hope, fragile as glass, had begun to bloom in her chest. But hope, in a royal court, is the most dangerous currency of all. It was old Master Halgrave, the king's herald, grey-bearded, back bent from decades of squinting at seals, who broke the spell. He had asked to examine the letters again. Not the words, the wax. He held one up to the light, turned it slowly in his gnarled fingers. Then he tapped the seal with a fingernail. A soft click, hollow. "Sire," he said, voice like dry reeds, "this seal bears the matrix impression of the Guild of Chandlers, Bristol. Year of our Lord 1368. Not the Wyndham Arms." Someone reused a merchant's stamp. A murmur rose, low, then sharp. She didn't flinch. Not at first. Her hands, tucked into the folds of her orange skirts, clenched. Her breath stayed even. "A mistake in copying, my lord," she said, voice steady. "The original seal was damaged in transit." "A copy?" Halgrave's voice cracked like a whip. "This is fresh wax, girl. Less than a fortnight old. And the script, see the ink bleed. Oak gall, yes, but mixed with too much gum. A novice's error. Or a forgery's." The king said nothing. He simply raised one hand. 2 guards stepped forward, not roughly, but with the quiet certainty of men who had done this before. They didn't seize her arms. They simply flanked her, a silent wall of boiled leather and steel. The crowd parted like water before a blade. She was taken not to a dungeon, but to the king's solar, a smaller, warmer room hung with Flemish tapestries, the scent of beeswax, and dried rosemary thick in the air. There, with only the chancellor, the herald, and the king's confessor present, the truth unraveled. She admitted it then. Not all at once, but in gasps, like water from a cracked cup. Her father had lost land, yes, but to debt, not royal decree. He had been a wool merchant, prosperous until the blight years. When creditors came, he had taken his own life rather than face the stocks. She was left with nothing but his name, his shame, and a desperate idea: if she were noble, even falsely, she could petition the crown for restitution. Not riches, dignity. A chance to stand tall again. And the dress, the king asked, his voice not angry, but heavy, like stone settling. She looked down at the light orange fabric. House Wyndham wore orange, sire. In remembrance of the harvest before the Black Death took them. I thought if I looked the part, the truth might follow. The king was silent a long time. Outside, a raven called from the battlements. Deceit under oath is treason, he said finally. But you did not seek to overthrow, nor poison, nor steal the crown's gold. You sought to rewrite your place in the world. That is a sin of pride, and pride, unchecked, wounds the soul more deeply than any blade. He stood. You will be corrected. Not in the yard, where animals are broken. But here. In the hall. Where truth must be witnessed. 12 strokes of the birch rod. For the 12 lies you wove into your petition. Let the court see the cost of falsehood. She didn't plead. She only nodded, once. A single tear escaped, tracing a clean line through the dust on her cheek. The grand hall was colder now, the torches brighter, the crowd denser. Servants, squires, knights in half-armor, ladies in fur-trimmed gowns, all turned toward the center, where a low wooden post had been set, wrapped in rope for grip. She walked in barefoot. Someone, perhaps the same maid who had helped her dress days ago, had removed her leather shoes, her stockings. Her feet were pale, slightly grime-streaked from the solar's stone floor. Her dress remained, but the laces at the back had been loosened, just enough to pull the neckline down past her shoulders, bearing the upper curve of her spine. Tradition demanded it. The punishment must fall on the body that bore the lie. The light orange fabric hung, like a flag of surrender. The rod was brought forward, not a whip, but a slender birch switch, peeled smooth, its tip flexible, its length just under 2 feet. Chosen not to maim, but to mark, to sear memory into skin. The executioner, a quiet man named Thomas who also mended the castle's fences, stepped forward. He tested the rod's flex with his wrist. A soft wick sound. Hold firm, he murmured, so low only she could hear. Breathe out with each stroke. She gripped the post. Cold wood. Smelled of pine resin and old sweat. The first stroke landed just below her shoulder blades. Crack. A white-hot line of pain. She gasped, not a cry, but a sharp inhale, teeth clenched. Her fingers dug into the rope. Second. Lower. Across the left blade. Her knees trembled. Third. Right side. Her breath hitched. Fourth. The same spot, deeper now. A tear fell. Then another. By the 6th, her body began to betray her. Her vision blurred at the edges. The torchlight flared like molten gold. The faces in the crowd swam, some pitying, some grim, one young squire looking faintly queasy. 7th. A strangled sound escaped her, a half sob, half gasp. Her forehead pressed against the post. 8th. Her legs buckled. Thomas caught her elbow, held her upright, not kindly, but firmly. Steady. 9th. She cried out, not loud, but raw. A single, broken syllable. Ah. The king hadn't moved. His face, half in shadow, was unreadable. But his knuckles were white where they gripped the lion's head on his throne. 10th. The birch caught the edge of her shoulder, just where the dress had slipped. Blood, thin, bright, beaded on the skin. 11th. She swayed. Her breath came in short, ragged bursts. Her chestnut braid had come undone, strands clung to her sweat-damp neck. 12th. A final, clean crack, like a branch snapping in frost. She collapsed. Strong hands caught her before she hit the rushes. Not Thomas, two of the king's own groomsmen. They lowered her gently onto a folded woolen blanket someone had laid nearby. A woman in a grey wimple, the castle's head healer, knelt beside her, uncorking a flask. The sharp, clean sting of vinegar water washed over her back. She flinched, but didn't pull away. Then, without being told, she pushed herself up. Slowly. On unsteady arms. Blood and vinegar streaked her light orange kirtle now, rust brown and pale gold mixing in ugly harmony. She turned. Faced the throne. Walked, staggered, really, 3 paces forward. Then sank to her knees. Not in submission. In acknowledgement. Her voice, when it came, was hoarse, cracked, like parchment torn, but clear. Carried to the farthest torchlit arch, I lied. A pause. She swallowed. Not for gold. Not for land. Not even for vengeance. Her hands rested on her thighs, trembling. For hope. I thought if I wore the color of truth long enough, it might stain me. Make me worthy. She lifted her head. Tears still fell, but her gaze was steady. Hope without truth is poison. It poisons the liar first. Then those who believe her. She bowed then, not a courtly curtsy, but a deep, full prostration, forehead pressed to the cold stone floor. The orange fabric pooled around her like a fallen leaf. I ask no pardon. Only that my shame serve as your warning. Silence. Then a single sound. The king shifted. Not a word. Not a gesture of mercy. But a slow, deliberate nod. That was enough. 3 days later, dawn mist clung to the castle walls like breath on glass. She stood in the scriptorium, a high, quiet room overlooking the herb garden, shelves lined with oak chests, desks slanted for parchment, the air rich with the scent of ink, vellum, and drying quills. She wore undyed wool now. Grey-brown, coarse, knee-length. No circlet. No lace. Her hair was bound back in a simple linen strip. Her back, beneath the wool, was healing, stripes of pink and gold, tender but closed. The master scribe, Brother Anselm, a man whose hands were stained permanently black, pointed to a stool beside his desk. Start with the land grants. Copy neatly. No flourishes. She Saturday. Dipped her quill. Her hand shook, just slightly, at first. Then steadied. Hours passed. The scrape of nib on vellum. The rustle of turning pages. The distant clang of the farrier's hammer. Then, on the margin of a draft charter concerning disputed pasture rights, she did something small. With the tiniest flick of her wrist, she drew a single, delicate vine. Not a rose. Not a wyvern. A truth vine, thorny stem, climbing upward, bearing 3 small, star-shaped white flowers, vinca minor, the flower of remembrance and fidelity. She didn't look up. But when the king passed the open doorway an hour later, returning from morning prayers, he paused. His eyes lingered on the margin. He said nothing. Instead, he reached into his robe, withdrew a single copper coin, worn smooth by countless hands, and placed it silently on the edge of her desk. Then he walked on. She didn't touch the coin. Not then. But that night, in the small, whitewashed chamber assigned to her near the kitchens, she unpicked a single thread from the hem of her old orange kirtle, the one washed clean and folded beneath her palette. A thread the color of dried marigolds. She wove it, carefully, through the leather thong of her new belt. Not as a claim. Not as a boast. But as a reminder. The next morning, as she copied the king's decree on grain tithes, her hand was steady. And in the quiet space between, by our royal authority, and given under our hand at Westminster, she wrote, not in the formal hand, but in her own, clear script, a single line, small, but unmissable, truth is the only lineage that cannot be forged. Outside, the raven called again. And this time, she didn't flinch. She kept writing.